Just after 4 in the morning on August 5th, 1962, a police sergeant in West Los Angeles took a phone call from a house in Brentwood. The voice on the line belonged to her own doctor, and the message was flat. Marilyn Monroe is dead. She was lying across her bed with a telephone near her hand and an empty bottle of Nembutal on the nightstand. She was 36 years old. The house was small, a one-story Spanish hacienda she'd bought at the start of that year, the first home she had ever owned by herself. Set into the front step was a tile left behind by earlier owners, carrying a Latin motto, Cursum Perficio, usually translated, "My journey ends here." By 1962, nearly everyone owned a piece of Marilyn Monroe. The studio owned her time, the magazines owned her face, a calendar company owned the most famous photograph of her body, one she'd been paid $50 for. The only person who never really owned Marilyn Monroe was the woman underneath her, because Marilyn Monroe was an invention, assembled in a studio office in 1946, and the girl who wore the name had spent her whole life being passed from one set of owners to the next. She was born Norma Jeane Mortenson on June 1st, 1926, in the charity ward of Los Angeles General Hospital. Her mother, Gladys, cut film negatives at a Hollywood processing lab. Her father was a blank space, a man who left before she was born and refused ever to meet her. Gladys couldn't keep her. Not yet 2 weeks old, Norma Jeane was placed with a foster family in Hawthorne, the Bowlenders, who raised her for 7 years while her mother visited on Saturdays. In 1933, Gladys managed something remarkable. She saved enough to buy a small house near the Hollywood Bowl and finally brought her daughter home. It lasted a few months. In early 1934, Gladys suffered a breakdown, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and was committed to a state hospital, and would spend the rest of her life in and out of institutions. From that point on, Norma Jeane belonged to whoever would take her. In 1935, the county sent her to the Los Angeles Orphans' Home. She was 9, and she kept telling the staff there'd been a mistake. She wasn't an orphan. Her mother was alive. From the orphanage, she could see the water tower of the RKO studio lot, where her mother had once worked. After the orphanage came more foster homes. Counting every household that ever took her in, she reckoned the total at 11. Some families took her in for the county's monthly boarding check and little else. She was moved so often she developed a stutter, and she learned early that being wanted was conditional and temporary. In 1942, her legal guardian's family was moving to West Virginia, and a ward of the state of California couldn't come along. Norma Jeane, 15, was given a choice that wasn't really one. Go back to the orphanage or get married. So barely 3 weeks after her 16th birthday, she married Jim Doherty, a neighbor's 21-year-old son. She said later, the marriage didn't make her sad and didn't make her happy either. She and her husband barely had anything to say to each other. When Jim went to sea with the Merchant Marine in 1944, Norma Jeane moved in with his parents and took a war job at the radio plane factory in Van Nuys, spraying varnish on target drones and inspecting parachutes. Near the end of the war, the Army's film unit sent a photographer named David Conover through the plant to shoot pictures of women doing war work. Conover found her on the assembly line, and he kept coming back. He'd been sent to photograph a factory, and he ended up teaching a drone inspector how to pose. Within a year, she had signed with the Blue Book modeling agency, bleached her brown curls blonde because blondes booked more work, and become one of the busiest models on their list. Magazine covers led to screen tests, and in August 1946, 20th Century Fox signed her to a starter contract at a reported $75 a week. She filed for divorce the same summer. She was 20. A Fox casting executive named Ben Lyon decided Norma Jean Doherty didn't sound like a star, so a new name was assembled in his office. Marilyn, after a Broadway performer he admired, and Monroe, her mother's family name. Then Fox dropped her after a year. Columbia picked her up and dropped her too. By the spring of 1949, she was 22 and out of work, behind on the payments for her car, and a photographer named Tom Kelly offered her $50 to pose nude against a sheet of red velvet. She signed the release as Mona Monroe and took the money. Kelly sold the images to a calendar company. That $50 afternoon would become one of the most reproduced photographs of the 20th century, and not one additional cent of it ever reached her. The climb was slow, and then it wasn't. Small Parts in the Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve in 1950 got her noticed. Fox signed her again, and by 1952, her fan mail was arriving in sacks. That March, a wire service reporter worked out that the nude on the calendar hanging in half the garages in America was Fox's rising starlet. The studio wanted a flat denial. Monroe overruled them and simply told the truth. She'd been broke and needed the money. Asked what she'd had on during the shoot, she said, "The radio." The honesty that was supposed to end her career made the country love her instead. Then came 1953. Niagara in January, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in July, How to Marry a Millionaire in November. 3 hits in a single year, and her handprints set in the cement outside Grauman's Chinese Theater. In December, a brand new magazine called Playboy launched with her on the cover, and that red velvet photograph as its first centerfold. Hugh Hefner had bought the rights from the calendar company. Nobody asked her, and nobody paid her, and Hefner, who never met her in his life, would one day buy the burial crypt next to hers. Here is what the biggest year of her life actually paid. Her contract fixed her salary at $1,500 a week, no matter what her pictures earned. So Gentlemen Prefer Blondes came to roughly $18,000, while Jane Russell, borrowed from another studio for the same film, was paid well over $100,000. Monroe understood the arithmetic perfectly. "I'm the blonde," she reminded the front office, "and it is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes." When Fox answered by assigning her yet another dumb blonde musical, she read the script, judged it cheap, and refused to report. The studio suspended her without pay. She was one of the biggest box office draws in America, and she could be switched off like a light. In January 1954, she married Joe DiMaggio at San Francisco City Hall, the retired ball player who hated crowds, and the woman half the world wanted to look at. On their honeymoon, she detoured to Korea and sang 10 shows in 4 days for 100,000 soldiers. The marriage lasted 9 months, and it broke, in most tellings, on a September night in Manhattan, with thousands of onlookers watched a fan blow her white dress into the air over a subway grate for the 7-year itch, take after take, with DiMaggio standing in the crowd. She filed for divorce within weeks. Then, at the peak of all of it, she disappeared from Hollywood. She moved east, lived quietly with the family of the photographer Milton Green, and in January 1955 called a press conference to announce something close to unthinkable. Marilyn Monroe Productions, her own film company, with herself as president and majority shareholder. The papers treated it as a punchline, and Fox insisted she was still their property. She didn't blink. She spent the year in New York studying at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, who would say, late in his life, that of all the actors he'd worked with, two stood above the rest: Marlon Brando and Marilyn Monroe. Meanwhile, The 7-Year Itch opened and became one of the biggest hits of 1955, reminding Fox week after profitable week exactly whose face sold the tickets. On the last day of 1955, the studio gave in. Her new contract paid $100,000 a picture, required only 4 films over 7 years, left her free to make her own movies on the side, and, almost unheard of in the studio era, gave her approval over her scripts, her directors, and her cinematographers. A girl from the Los Angeles orphans' home had just beaten the studio system. When Bus Stop came out the following year, the New York Times review opened. "Hold on to your chairs, everybody, and get set for a rattling surprise. Marilyn Monroe has finally proved herself an actress." She married the playwright Arthur Miller in June 1956. The papers called them the Egghead and the Hourglass. And for a while, the life she'd designed seemed to be working. Her company produced The Prince and the Showgirl opposite Laurence Olivier. And more than any film, she wanted children. That's where the years turned cruel. An ectopic pregnancy in 1957, a miscarriage in 1958, endometriosis that had put her in serious pain since her teens. Each loss deepened her dependence on the sleeping pills that Hollywood doctors of that era handed out like aspirin, barbiturates for the insomnia, and a little more of them every year because the insomnia never gave. The strange thing is that her best work came out of the worst of it. Some Like It Hot was agony to make. She was pregnant through the filming with the baby she would lose that December. She needed take after take, and Billy Wilder's set ran on gritted teeth. And it became the biggest hit of her career. It won her the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy, and decades later the American Film Institute would name it the greatest American comedy ever made. Miller wrote The Misfits for her, a serious, dramatic role, the kind of part she'd spent a decade asking for. By the time the cameras rolled in the Nevada desert in the summer of 1960, in 100-degree heat, the marriage was dying in front of the crew, and midway through the shoot she was hospitalized for exhaustion. Filming ended in early November. The divorce was announced days later. And Clark Gable, her co-star, and the man whose photograph she'd pretended was her father when she was a girl, had a heart attack days after the picture wrapped and was dead within 2 weeks. The Misfits reached theaters in February 1961. It was the last film she ever finished. Days later, her New York analyst checked her into the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic. She thought she was going in for rest. Instead, the door locked behind her. She had been placed on a ward for severely disturbed patients. A cement block room, a glass panel in the door so anyone passing could look in, bars on the window, her clothes taken away. The more she protested, the more the protests were written down as symptoms. In a letter to her California psychiatrist, she said it felt like a prison for a crime she hadn't committed. She got to a telephone and called Joe DiMaggio in Florida. The marriage had been over for 6 years. He came anyway, overnight, and reportedly told the hospital that if she wasn't released, he would take the place apart, brick by brick. She was out within days. The next year, she tried to build a life that was actually hers. She bought the little hacienda in Brentwood. She cried at the signing, friends said, because she was doing it alone, and went back to work at Fox on a comedy called Something's Got to Give. She was sick through the spring, running fevers and missing days. In May, she flew to New York and sang Happy Birthday to President Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. The studio logged it as one more absence. On June 1st, she turned 36 on the set. It was the last day of film ever shot of her. A week later, Fox fired her, sued her for breach of contract, and let reporters know the star was finished. Then Dean Martin, her co-star, refused to make the picture with anyone else, and the studio's position collapsed. Within weeks, Fox negotiated her return at a reported $1 million over 2 pictures, several times her old rate, while across the lot, Elizabeth Taylor was being paid $1 million for Cleopatra alone. That summer, she gave Life magazine a long interview and finally got at the thing she'd been trying to say for years. A sex symbol becomes a thing, and she hated being a thing. The interview ended with a request. Please don't make me a joke. On the evening of August 4th, 1962, she went to her bedroom around 8 and said goodnight through the door. Sometime in the night, she died. The autopsy found pentobarbital and chloral hydrate in her blood at many times the normal dose, and the coroner ruled the death a probable suicide. She left no note. Joe DiMaggio took charge of the funeral and shut Hollywood out. No executives, no stars, roughly 30 mourners in a small Westwood chapel, while Judy Garland's recording of Over the Rainbow played. Then he placed a standing order, 6 red roses at her crypt, 3 times a week. The order ran for 20 years. He never remarried. Her will left most of her estate to Lee Strasberg, her teacher, and a quarter of it to Dr. Marianne Criss, the analyst who had committed her to Payne Whitney. When Strasberg died, everything passed to his 3rd wife, Anna, a woman Marilyn never met, who licensed the name and the face to anyone who would pay, earning by one estimate several times what Monroe made in her entire career, and then sold control of it all in 2011 for a reported $20 to $30 million. The estate still earns millions every year. Norma Jeane spent 36 years being owned by the county, by foster families, by studios, by an image she built and could never put down. She has been gone for 64 years now, and somebody still owns Marilyn Monroe. It just was never her.